Hello and welcome to the Punkling Podcast. I am Jared and I'm here with my co host.
This is Rolando, also known as Godly Divine on all the appropriate platforms.
And we are back again, much to our surprise. This week, we're going to be having a bit of a discussion on game complexity, and kind of the interplay of game mechanics and where the threshold of like being too difficult and too complex is and too simple and being boring, and just kind of going off from that idea. So yeah, to start us off, I mean, this whole concept, at least for me, I um kind of thought of this because I'm currently writing a script. I just finished the script actually, and I'm working on a video that's about games that I'm calling mechanical sandbox games, because we've all heard of the sandbox genre of, games that just kind of
Mhm.
dump you into a world, go build what you want, do what you want. And while that those are, that creative genre of game, your Minecrafts, your a lot of logistics games kind of have that same sandbox feeling. It's build this thing, we don't care how you do it, but give it a shot. And I kind of realized that there's a lot of games that are similar in that, dump you into a world and build something cool, but they're not about building, and they're about how their mechanics play uh, into offering you creative solutions. And there's a whole bunch of genres of this. A couple examples that I'm thinking of right now are like Far Cry games do this really well, surprisingly. For all of the Ubisoft bashing that we can do, the one thing that they do very decently well on these games is that they stuff them full of a bunch of small mechanics that when you put them all together, you can get some really funny results, and some really interesting creative solutions outside of just sitting on a hillside with a silent sniper rifle and waltzing your way through the entire game. Um, but yeah, so Rolando, I'm kind of curious, where are you in this whole, like, this concept of game complexity? What makes a game too difficult and or too complex? What makes a game just too simple and it just needs more substance? Like, and what examples could you possibly give?
Um, so when it comes to I feel like I should define like what that means for me, what complexity, difficulty, and simplicity all themselves mean to me, because I feel like that's whenever this discussion happens, though that's different for everybody, right? And that a lot of the times is an issue. So for starters, like simplicity to me is a clear cut defining like what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to achieve doing it. That is like a simplicity, a simple game in and of itself. Whereas like a so like for example, like what like specifically what you're supposed to do is most story driven games like
Hmm.
Fallout 4 to an extent, because when it comes down to it, like, yes, it's pretty open world and sandboxing. You don't have to do the main storyline, but the goal of the game is just there. You know what I mean? It's always there. Those quests are
It's
there.
drawn on a marker on your map. When you're
Yeah,
ready to progress, go to this place, and the game will continue.
exactly. And that to me is simplicity. And that's so you could argue that I believe that most RPGs in general are just simplicity, right? But the complexity comes in. Complexity to me means more of like those intertwining little things you can do to progress, right? So like the things that most of the time for people who play a game on easy, normal, or even like a medium difficulty, um, who would never use them in the way that they were intended. I am a firm believer that most games are designed around being played at their hard and or legendary quote unquote difficulties,
Hmm.
because that's when those mechanics matter. So the Fallout 4 example, like being able to craft your own weapons, it's cool at the beginning, your first playthrough when you're playing it on normal or medium or whatever, but most people don't. Like they do it once or twice and they're like, oh, okay, well, this is boring. I can just like pick up a good legendary drop off when I'm farming random bandits in a city somewhere. Um, I could just get lucky and be just fine. Um, so like a game that doesn't require you to use those mechanics, but also incentivizes you at a later difficulty or later time to use them as well. I feel like that is a complexity. Complexity in and of itself is like a it's weird. So like yeah, complexity in and of itself is like a almost a choice. Like you choose to apply yourself to
Hmm.
that complexity itself.
You
And
know,
then go ahead.
yeah, it's funny. Oh, sorry. Continue.
No, go ahead.
Oh, but do you want me to? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny that you bring that up because that's something I've been considering, for a while. And I'd love to make a video on that some other time. But the that idea of how involved with the game's systems and mechanics you have to be is really when you're doing your difficulty slider. Like, yes, there is, of course, all of the there's all the basic, oh, you're gonna get increased enemy health and damage, and really well made games usually increase enemy like intelligence and aggression. So like in shooters, they'll try to flush you out of cover more often, or they'll try to flank around if you
Mhm.
keep staying behind the same spot, stuff like that. And yeah, you've been talking about Fallout, and I'm thinking about Skyrim because I am addicted to Skyrim.
Right.
um
Your Sky
Legendary
my follow
difficulty.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, it's okay.
No, you're good.
And yeah, legendary difficulty in Skyrim is um it's something else. Like I yeah, you have to interact with all of the the game's systems to even like begin to stand a chance. But even then, it's where what I personally believe, it oversteps its bounds into the realm of some systems and game mechanics become obsolete because they're no longer viable at that level. Like, I
Hmm.
don't know if you've ever tried to play a vanilla Skyrim mage on Legendary. It's a really bad idea. Do not do it. And so like destruction magic, because of that, you're doing 1/4 of your damage. The already kind of weak destruction spells, you now are dealing like, so like I think lightning bolt, for example, does 25 damage. That means you're doing 6 damage per lightning bolt, which is suboptimal when you have enemies running at you. And so like to kill a basic level 1 bandit with just casts of lightning bolt, it will take you 6 casts of lightning bolt to down one single bandit. And there's usually groups of 3 to 5. So yeah, magic kind of becomes obsolete, and there's ways to do it, but it sometimes requires breaking the game to a point of like exploiting. I'm sure everybody knows about the alchemy restoration
Hmm.
enchanting loop in
Hmm.
Skyrim, where you make potions to fortify your enchanting. You make enchantments that fortify. I think it's like your restoration, and then because your restoration technically affects the power of of potions and other healing things, it increases the power of the potions you make. So then you go back, make powerful potions, powerful enchantments, powerful potions, powerful enchant, until you get a sword that deals 1,679,000 damage or whatever. And it's you essentially are snapping the game in half, and you're like, see, there you go, it's perfectly balanced as all things should be.
Yeah.
And
And then
so
that
yeah,
breeds
that's
to
my point on that.
yeah, that breeds to difficulty, right? So like talked about simplicity and complexity, right? So like that's just difficulty, right? Like that is the perfect
Mhm.
example of a game that wasn't intended to be played at that difficulty. That that difficulty mode was not its intended range. It was intended as a sandbox, do whatever you want, run around and hit things. And then eventually with the awakening of the RPG genre and what happened thereafter is they're probably one of the first people who I don't know this for a fact, right? I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this is fact, but they're probably one of the first people who added that like that kind of difficulty because they're the ones that basically broke out the RPG genre in mass, right? I mean, it's been re-released like 10
Mhm.
billion times, and the first crack at it,
Hmm.
the first way that they maybe thought to make it more difficult, it's like, oh, okay, well, take away fast travel. You got to walk everywhere. That's fine, no big deal. Um, cut your damage into a quarter, and then to a quarter of the damage you would normally deal, and then double everybody else's damage and health pools. And that
Actually,
is
it's triple.
is it triple? Okay, so like that's not even
It's
like that.
triple.
That's
Don't
not
try
fun.
playing a warrior.
Yeah, like that's not fun. I have finished
It's bad,
one's
dude.
legendary Skyrim playthrough, and you know how I did it? I made a big tanky motherfucker ran around with a shield, and I used
Mhm,
traps to clear everything. I had to use the
mhm,
game itself because it buffs the trap damage too. I used the game itself to
mhm,
clear places, and I would run back and forth on traps, re-trigger them, and dodge out of the way to clear dungeons.
mhm.
That is how I beat boss fights. That is
You
how I
know,
cleared Draugr caves, like that, the Dwemer ruins, like yeah.
oh god, those things are packed. Yeah, the thing about those higher difficulties is when it starts to, Skyrim, its whole thing was about, fantasy. I talked about this in my ordinator video, where Skyrim is all about, it's about a fantasy, not necessarily a power fantasy, but about coming up with an idea for the character you want to play. I mean, part of the RPG is the RP, the role play. You have an idea of who or what you want to be within that world.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, these harder difficulties, like legendary, it kind
Right.
of pulls you out of that RP part, and it says, "Yeah, that's cool and all that you want to play as, I don't know, an orc who wanted a more peaceful life, so he learns illusion magic." Because you're just going to have to play in this one way. You're going to be an orc that's really afraid of everything and keeps running over traps to get things killed. And like, one of the strategies that you see frequently is two-handed is essentially out of the question because you need to
Mhm.
have, the option to block, because any unblocked attack is probably lethal. And so you're using one-handed and then either a shield in the other hand or restoration, because restoration can restore stamina, so you're pretty much just keeping things stagger locked with your one-handed power attacks, and then you're just healing yourself. And it's like, okay, that's I guess something, but I wanted to be something else. Like, you could also, the classic sneak archer is another pretty solid legendary build, because you can get so much damage that, all the damage penalties don't even matter to you when you're
Yeah.
dealing like 1,000 damage per shot. Dealing
All the
250 damage per shot is still a lot.
yeah, yeah, the
And
damage
so,
multipliers.
yeah, and so there's a few viable builds, and there are builds, that are kind of in the veins. Like, I've seen people do vanilla mage builds, but these builds don't come online until like 30, 40, 50 levels into the game. And a lot of the early game is not spent playing your build. It's spent avoiding interactions and not doing what you want to be doing until you've set up everything you need to play that build specifically. So, like, this guy that does build videos online, Fevy, he has all these really cool builds, but like, I think most of them, I think he has two that don't require crafting for legendary, because that's becomes a hard requirement. It doesn't matter if you don't want to role play as like a big dumb warrior who has no idea about magic, no idea about enchantments. He just wants to hit things with a sword. You can't do that. He has to enchant, or he's not playing on legendary. Those are your options. And so, yeah, it's but these builds, like, they're super cool. All props and credit to this guy. He makes amazing stuff. But a lot of, like, the first 20 to 30 levels is usually just him, like, go plant these specific alchemy ingredients in a farm, then go and then just wait for like 30 days in game time and just keep harvesting them until you have enough. And so you're like, okay, but I didn't really come here to play farming simulator. I came here to play Skyrim, question mark. And so,
So so
yeah,
that begs
it
the
can
question,
really.
right?
Mhm,
That begs the question, right?
mhm.
So like what is So everyone is biased to one game over the other, but what to you? I know I have an answer in my head. What to you is the
Hmm.
perfect game that encompasses simplicity in its goals, complexity in its systems, and difficulty, and marries them together in a way that is actually thoroughly enjoyable.
Hmm. Um, I have a couple of good answers. No great answers. I think, Dark Souls. I wouldn't put simplicity on. I do think that the Souls games are they're easier than the whole like prepare to die motto leads on. A lot of their difficulty does come from kind of intentional obfuscation of your goals and your where you want to be going. There's a reason that there's a whole subgenre of YouTube videos around making easy to follow guides for Dark Souls, because yeah, it's pretty easy. Like I remember in a review, I think from Zero Punctuation, he says something like, oh yeah, that item was super easy to get if you just knew how to backtrack 3 levels and then go and find it behind a wall of fire, behind 3 enemies, behind a boss fight. Yeah, it's super easy to find that one item. And you're like, oh, of course, of course. How could I have missed the rusted iron ring? Just crawl up to a bird's nest, curl up like a ball for 20 seconds, and then the bird will carry me back to where I started. I'll fight the same enemy again, and then I'll get duh, obviously. And so that it's not simple in Dark Souls. It's complex, but I also don't think that it's I think that it's a very fair game, but yeah, I wouldn't use that. I think a game that is actually done really, really well with that, and like, so hear me out, is Super Mario Odyssey.
Mm,
And I know that sounds weird because it's a Mario game. Mario games can't be hard, but it has that perfect skill floor and skill ceiling of for difficulty and like progression of you can barely clear the game. You can minimum clear the game with like 120 stars, or 120 moons, I think. And then I went for the challenge of getting the max. I think it's like 800 and something moons, and that was some of the most fun I have ever had with a game where my wife, she would just look up online and she would search for where moons are in each stage. She'd tell me where they are, and then I was up to me to figure out how to do these insane tricks. It was like, oh yeah, just wall jump off this wall, throw your hat, bounce off your hat, dive forward again, land on this very small platform, jump off again, throw your hat, dive, bounce off your hat again, and then you'll get the moon. You're like, what?
mhm,
These are not things that you would figure out in normal gameplay, but they feel really cool and they feel intended. As I always thought, like, there was always something in these hidden corners of the map that required a lot of skill to get to, because when you feel like you're breaking the game's rules, it feels like the game's nodding back to you and going, no, I knew you could do this. Like, you'll find a little stash of coins. Like, there's a level with a maze in it where you have to navigate this maze, but then you realize the walls are kind of narrow, and so if you jump out of the enemies, you're supposed to fly a bullet bill around the maze. If you
mm,
jump out of the bullet bill from possessing it, you can wall jump your way up to the top of the maze and just run across the top, and there's coins all scattered along the top. It's kind of a nod of like, yeah, smart creative thinking out of the box. That was something we thought it too. So I
yeah,
think Super
okay.
Mario Odyssey would probably be my perfect game for complexity, and being difficult, because it's essentially as difficult as you choose to make it. If you say I want all 880 moons, the game will not hold back, and I really, really enjoy that.
Nice. Okay. I would not have guessed that. That is interesting. I have done my own playthroughs of Super Mario, but I haven't really Super Mario Odyssey specifically, but I haven't really like gotten into it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But so for like me, I have two examples that are kind of on far-reaching corners of the galaxy. Um, the first one is it's kind of like you play the game a lot like I do. It's Pokemon, and that's the video game, not the card game. maybe one day I'll we'll have a discussion about the about card games. But anyways, um,
Mhm.
Pokemon is simple in what it is you're supposed to do in the storyline for a normal person who goes to your local Walmart, GameStop, whatever, and picks up a copy. It's simple, it's fun. There's a lot of information you don't care about, and then there's like the medium ground player that is like, oh well, I'm gonna have like a team that works really well together, that has moves that um, that benefit from each other. Like I'm gonna have
Mhm.
Sableye with Baton Toss and bulk up,
Uh,
and I'm gonna bulk up Baton Toss to my Blaziken, and Blaziken's gonna one shot everything with double kick for the rest of the range, right? Or whatever, right? That's
mhm.
probably I don't
Very
even know if
very
Sableye
basic
can.
setup. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think Sableye can
I
actually learn baton toss, but that's not the
I
point, right?
think
So
Sableye can learn Baton Pass, right?
I don't remember.
Yeah,
It's a ghost. It's a dark ghost type that can. So it's either him or Dusclops.
yeah.
That's not
It's
important.
Sableye can. Yeah, Sableye can learn it. Anyway, sorry, I
Yeah,
wanted to learn. I was like, wait, can it? Yeah, I can learn it.
yeah. But that's like the middle ground difficulty, right? And then there's all these other systems that you care about, and then there's like the people who like how good can I make my Pokemon? Like then you get into
Hmm.
IVs and
IV,
EVs and EV
natures
training
and
and
EVs, and yeah.
natures and strategic switch outs and tanking shots and baiting certain abilities,
Oh
and
yeah,
then there's even
predictions.
yeah, and then there's even the added difficulty of Nuzlocks. Like once something dies, it's dead.
Hmm.
Randomizing what you get. Like there's the overarching. Like you can make it as complex as you want it to be. It can be as simple as out of the box, play this game, go through the story, beat the Elite Four, be in post game, get whatever 2 3 mythicals are supposed to come out because usually there's some amount of mythicals you have access to. Like in Pokemon Legends Arceus, I believe it's
Hmm.
all the Reggies and Regigigas. Also,
Hmm.
obviously, like you get to like talk to Arceus, but oh, and
Also, chatting with
Gear,
God.
and then you like fight Giratina. I think,
Giratina.
yeah, you
Yeah.
like you beat up Giratina, and then like Jesus is like,
Mhm.
yeah, hey, good job, proud of you, and then he leaves. That's it. Um, it's
Good
pretty.
job, fam.
It's
Thumbs up. Peace.
it's a fun game, but it's as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. Um,
Hmm.
and so it can encompass both of those things, and then the difficulty is the thing you can gauge yourself, right? And that's the thing I love about that. That's was why I'm mentioning 2 games, is because the thing I love the most about Pokemon is if something is too hard, you can literally choose to remove a rule for yourself. You're like, oh, I cannot do this, this run is going to be over because of this rule I put on myself. I'm going to now choose to not
Hmm.
do this rule because this is too hindering. And you learn a lot about like really weird in-game mechanics and how to bait certain Pokemon, and
Hmm.
how the AI for certain Pokemon will statistically use one move over the other, and sometimes you get like asked out because the enemy's corrupt when faced against another fire type is 98% of the time going to use ancient power as opposed to earthquake has higher base damage and you have 50 HP left, and you're like, all right, cool. If he ancient powers, I win. So I'm gonna stay in and I'm gonna kill it because he outspeeds me. And then he earthquakes and you die. Like so, sometimes it happens. It's a risk reward type of situation. But then there's also situations where you're like, well, the opponent's Flygon is always going to be faster than me, and he hits harder. I just lose if I don't allow myself to get rid of like this one rule or whatever, right? Or like he's just going to wipe my
Yeah,
team
it's
because
actually
of random encounters.
it's actually really funny that you brought this up because I have recently been on this kick for watching Nuzlocke online. Like, I've always had a passive interest. I'm not a competitive Pokemon player, but I watch, like competitive history from like False Swipe, and I find Pokemon, super fascinating. Whenever I do playthroughs of the games, I, do minimal restrictions on myself, no legendaries allowed, trying to,
Mhm.
level cap myself before,
Yeah,
like the ace of each gym leader, but not like don't go crazy full Nuzlocke, but it is still not, not like releasing or anything. But like, it is nice when you put those restrictions on yourself just to see, because you're like, yeah, Pokemon games, people have been asking for years for an official harder difficulty, because a lot of people, there's like those videos of, can I beat this, can I beat Pokemon with only like a Weedle or a Caterpie or something? Can I beat this, while only pressing A and never pressing any other button? And stuff like that, outside of movement, but essentially every battle just pressing A and having one attack is their first best attack, and then you just press A, and that's literally what you do the entire game. And so, yeah, people have, been vying for years to have an official harder difficulty. And one thing I actually really liked, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to play them yet, Rolando, but Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, that thing blindsides you in like the
Hmm.
best way possible when you get to the Elite Four. Like, you're
Yep.
going through the game nice and simple, standard, any other Pokemon game, and then you get to the Elite Four, and they're using items. They have a one of I think I fell in love with those games, like those remakes, when the bug Elite Four guy throws out a Flame Orb Guts Heracross with Facade.
Hmm.
And I was like,
Hmm.
bro, that's the literal
Yep.
competitive strategy.
No,
Is you
it
get a
100%
Heracross who
is.
has a ridiculous attack spat, and then you give it a Flame Ward so it burns itself, so Guts procs. Then you give it Facade, which it does 100 base power, or like, I think 140 if it's
Yeah.
because it's 70 base doubled if it's status. And this thing just walks into the ring and just slaps all your Pokemon in the ass, and you're like, oh, cool. I guess I got
Yeah.
swept by a Heracross. That's awesome.
And that's just one of them. But
Exactly.
yeah,
That's
so
one Pokemon of their teams. It's crazy.
there was, I believe it was Soul Silver. You know who Wolf Glick is, right?
Yes,
Wolf
he's
Glick,
like a
yeah.
super
Like
famous
he's won,
VGC, like multiple
yeah,
champions.
yeah, he's won multiple world championships and stuff. But he's actually, I think it's Soul Silver. There's like a online DLC thing. So at the end of Soul Silver, the post game, that was before like post Elite Four. There wasn't a lot to do. But for this one, what they did in this game is essentially, you could, when you were downloaded to the internet, when you were connected to the internet via your DS, you were able to go and connect to a like you connect to a server and you can download specific like fights essentially, right? And what they did is one of the tournaments, quote unquote, because you're basically playing in tournaments against the computer. What they essentially did is they put the top four as one of the tournaments you could download. The top four from the world's finals. So you actually get to play against real people and their exact teams, exact IVs, EVs,
Oh
HP
my.
values, moves, and exact team that they used to get to it. So like those people are in a video game and it's hard. And they program the AI to do what's optimal. And they fucking destroy you if you're not ready and you just like download it. I've seen people play that and they get to Wolfglick and they're like, "Oh, haha, lol, we're just this is the only way we're gonna be able to beat him," and then he just waxes them. It's not even funny. Like it's sad. They just sit there and they're like, "Cool, the run's
It's
over
sad.
because Wolfglick is it." Yeah, it's so funny. But yeah, that's one of the things about Pokemon. I don't play competitively. I might. I'm on like a Pokemon kick recently. Um, when the new game comes out at our local card store that I work at part time, where we're going to have local VGC tournaments. Um, I'm
Oh,
gonna
that's
set it up
cool.
so yeah,
Huh.
so I'm at least gonna get into it. More than likely, I'm gonna be the judge for it and stuff. Um,
Mm.
just because Luis doesn't want to deal with it. But I think it would be really cool, and it would
Mhm.
just bring people in. In general, the demographic that comes in for that, as opposed to card games, would be different. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Mhm.
But like, I love the video game, and I love that. Yeah, like so. Like first time I played Legends Arceus is I just played it straight through, picked my favorite Pokemon, ran around with Decidueye as a fighting type, and like a fucking golem, and just beat everybody up. It was awesome. And then the second playthrough, I was like, you know what would be really cool if I could do the entire game with just fighting types, and if I white out,
Okay, yeah,
I'll
single
start
type
over.
trainers. Oh, I love doing that. I love doing
It's
single
so
type
much
trainer
fun.
like playthroughs where you choose yourself to be someone. So like I think I did one as a it was either a poison or a pure grass. I think. Oh yeah, though that's what it was. So when I did Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, I think I played through Shining Pearl. I played as a grass type trainer because I always have loved the grass type, and so my entire team had to have at least one typing of grass somewhere. So that was another layer
Mhm.
of difficulty to it in fighting the Elite Four and whatnot. That was rough.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially against Flint. Oh man, that was
God,
what fun.
there's got to be so many swaps in that fight. So many swaps to try and tank
It was
things and like,
it
yeah,
was yeah, a lot of predictions. Torterra was actually really nice because he doesn't hard lose to fire because I think ground resists fire, right?
yeah, yeah.
I think
It
it
makes
does.
it
I
makes
could be
fire
wrong.
neutral. It does. It does. Yeah. So it makes
So
fire
yeah, it
neutral
has a
instead of
neutral to
super
fire.
effective. Yeah.
And he knows earthquake, so Torterra was MVP for that fight. But yeah, it was really interesting, like against Cynthia, because her team is legendary for how hard it was when we were younger, and I feel like they almost were like, we want them to remember how hard it felt when they were younger. And I think I
Hmm.
had to redo that fight 2 or 3 times until I actually nailed it down. Because yeah, essentially, I have a Torterra who's slow as hell. So he, wasn't able to do things. Her Lucario had all kinds of weird ass coverage moves. My Lodic was way harder than you'd expect for a grass type team because that ridiculous special defense, and it's like perfectly special defense trained with a plus special defense nature. So
Hmm.
so since most grass like stabs are special, at least from
Hmm.
what I had, I think I had used Torterra's wood hammer, and even then it still had a lot of defensive bulk. That Milotic was just obnoxious to try and get through. Ugh. But yeah, that was an interesting challenge playthrough. So sorry about that. I just had to go on that thing of
No, you're
fun
good.
single type playthroughs.
Yeah, it's super fun. It's super fun. It's some of the funnest times I've had with Pokemon games. This is the first time I've done it. I watched. I think his name is Flygon. And he started a playthrough on one of the hacked ROMs. Inclement Emerald, I think it was called. No, it was the platinum one. Anyways, that's not
Oh,
important.
I feel
But he
like I
was
know what
like,
you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, he was doing it. He was doing a type playthrough, and I was like, well, what's my favorite type in Pokemon? And I was like, well, that's hard because my favorite Pokemon is Blastoise. But in the card
Oh
game,
yeah.
whenever there's a new fighting type, that's what I play. I try to make it work. They're pretty bad, but they're generally pretty bad. But they're bulky and they hit hard, so it's basically in my wheelhouse. So I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna see if I can beat Pokemon Legends Arceus with just fighting types. And at the end, in the Giratina fight, because I forgot it was a two-phase fight, um, I only had Machamp left, and I won with a Mac Punch at 2 HP. And it was one of the funnest end of game experiences. Like, if I lost, I wasn't even going to be mad because my little forearm buff guy just tried to fight the devil. Um, and and almost won. You know what I mean? And at the end of that fight, like it was so much fun and it was super rewarding. And then since then, I beat it with rock types. I think last week. So I'm currently trying to decide what the next thing is. I'm just biding my time for the new Pokemon game. But um, another thing, so I mentioned there was two games that I think that do this that are on opposite ends of the spectrum, in terms of simplicity, complexity, and difficulty, and that is Path of Exile. So
Poe.
PoE, PoE is incredibly complex in the math and the skill tree specifically. Skill tree is famous. Everyone who has ever played an online game ever has seen that skill tree because people use it as a meme, like haha lol, our game is simple. And it doesn't look that way, and it's very overwhelming. And it's very difficult for people who consume content on a game to be able to get into it. But if you're just like a normal kid, you're on Steam, you're like, hey, this game looks dope, download it, don't look at any content, and you just play and you put your skill points wherever, um, you can still play the game. You can get through the story. You can do some in-game content. You're not going to be efficient. You can't do Uber Elder, which is their equivalent to like mythic raid bosses. Um,
Hmm.
you can't do any of that stuff, right? But you can still have a damn good time uh, doing it. And the difficulty scaling is quite a steep curve, to be honest. But what I think breeds the complexity into it is the fact that it's just it's not even the skill tree that makes it complex. It's the fact that different builds and different interactions within different skill gems, like not the skill points themselves, right? Not the passives, but the like the buttons you push when you're doing your thing. The interactions between those things and figuring those out is super satisfying.
Hmm.
Or you could be like
Yeah,
me and consume.
oh, you
Oh, go
continue.
ahead.
Oh
Or
no,
you can
continue. I
be
want
okay.
to.
You can be like me and just consume a ridiculous amount of content on every game you ever intend to play ever, and come in gungs ho, guns a blazing with a thorough representation of what it is you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to play a game. Play it that way, and then branch
Hmm.
out from there. So, like I said, so it's you can choose to be super simple about it. And like I said, the overarching thing is like you play through the story, then you go and you do maps, or for those who have played Diablo before, greater rifts. Same basic concept, but they have a lot more end game content as well. It's not just greater rifts or maps or whatever. There's like yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
That idea there of like taking in a lot of content before playing games. I'm very similar. I like to watch guides, learn tips and tricks and weird tech and everything like that, so I feel like I have some idea of knowing what I'm doing. And also because, like you said earlier, you like going into games on higher than average difficulty. I like feeling prepared. It feels like a good trade-off. If I'm going to watch videos about this, I'm gonna start this game on hard or very hard or whatever, because I already have my my baseline for knowledge. So the only thing I need to do now is execution. And it's actually kind of funny that you brought up Path of Exile, because like, if Super Mario Odyssey wasn't a wasn't already kind of a left field choice for a difficult, like a simple, complex, difficult game, I think MapleStory falls under that. And I know that's weird to say, your favorite hit shit game, as you have lovingly called it over the years.
100%,
um,
100%.
uh,
That is by far the
I
only
want to hit
game I
shit,
can.
man.
Yeah, that is by far the only game I can turn on my second monitor. You know, the one off to the side that you kind of look at stuff in your periphery. I
Hmm.
can put it on my second monitor, play it on my second monitor as I am watching Netflix on my main monitor. That is literally the only game I have ever been able
Hmm.
to do that with, and it will forever live in my heart because of that reason.
Yeah, and so MapleStory is very simple hit shit design. Everything is super spammable. Most training and grinding is relatively easy. Um, and then it's a lot of the early game bosses are very similar in that, like, a lot of their patterns are very easy, simple, like kind of call and response. I am, Zakum, I'm lifting up a hand, here's a place where I'm going to hit my hand. Do not stand in the place where I'm going to hit my hand. And then he hits his hand down. If you are still in that place, you're probably going to die. But then as you get further and further down, like, I think around Chaos Root Abyss, which is kind of a lot of the Maple Story community kind of calls that the transition into the mid game, is when you're taking on Chaos Root Abyss. And that is where all of these bosses that have a normal mode, they have a whole bunch of additional mechanics and really just interesting, interplay between their abilities. Like Chaos Crimson Queen, she'll blind you, and she has a one-shot attack that'll pretty much cover one half of the map. And so if you get hit by her blind attack, you just have to guess pretty much, or you have to like try and see through like some of the cracks in the blind, what color if she's turning like dark, so to jump to the other side of her. But other than that, you're probably going to get one shot. And then there's Chaos Pierre, who nobody loves. He has this really stupid phase that is made to be taken with one person, but to solo him, you essentially have to die. But essentially, like, these bosses, they get really weirdly, like this weird spike in difficulty where like a lot of people have the damage range, but they just don't have the mechanics down, because that's a lot of MMOs. There's guilds can have the damage for it. Most guilds do with the with mostly in-game gear. uh, People should have the damage for it, but it's the mechanics and balancing damage and mechanics at the same time that the game goes from that fun hit shit to what the hell am I doing. And the higher your damage range, the higher your margin for error, the higher, the more mechanics you can screw up. Or my favorite, if you just burst the boss fast enough, you don't have to worry about mechanics, right? And so
What are
um
mechanics?
what are mechanics if you just one shot the boss, can't kill you if it's dead? And so these late game bosses, like a lot of people would say that like Lotus and Damien, they're two of kind of like the official, I'd say, mid game bosses. They are really what you where the mechanics start to come full circle, where you have things like stacks that if you get too many stacks, it's an instant wipe. If you So you have to use a specific place that you have to be at that only spawns on a certain interval, and you have to make sure that you're not getting too many stacks in that time, and you have to balance who gets to cleanse, because some people have low stacks, some will have high stacks, and then the boss AI will change around who has trying to stack on who has the lowest, or trying to finish off who has the highest. And so stuff like that, and it just all these really weird, interesting complexities start to show their head. And what was just the I'm killing mushrooms and slimes while watching Netflix. You now have to like watch boss guides and really really learn boss mechanics and know what they're doing generally, like by because it'll usually give you a little prompt, like most bosses do in MMOs. Where the boss will say something or do something, and that means take this response. They're not always clear of what's going to one shot you until you are dead. And so you have to actually start learning and noticing patterns, and it's really interesting. So yeah, I would give that 100% to MapleStory. They that game has changed a lot since the old days, and I personally, hot take, think it's for the better, because their boss design is impeccable, except for Hard Magnus. Nobody, all my homies hate Hard Magnus.
That's
It's a
funny.
boss with just a whole bunch of
Um,
stuff falling from the ceiling that can become literally impossible to dodge. It's so much fun.
um, but yeah, I can totally see how that falls in that same wheelhouse, right? Where like the
Mhm.
complexity of the game is what you choose. Like MapleStory for me will probably never be that like daily grind through your bosses type of thing. It's probably always going to be my favorite hit shit game, but I don't know that it'll ever. Maybe it will, but I don't know that for sure that
Mhm.
it'll ever be more than that for me, and like that's okay, right? Um,
Mhm.
I am the kind of person that needs to have like three games in circulation at all times, right? And three different types. Like I'm normally playing three to four different games in general. Like if I'm playing with friends, I'm like playing League of Legends, World of Warcraft, or Final Fantasy. One of the three, if not all of them, sometimes. Um, that's what I play with friends. And then when I'm by myself, like right now, I've been playing Pokemon. Sometimes it's Fallout. Sometimes it's a modded Skyrim. Sometimes it's Baldur's Gate, Tiny Tina's Wonderland. Stuff like that. And then there's always an element of card games involved, whether that's with physical cards or we're on Master Duel, on Magic the Gathering Arena, on Magic the Gathering Online,
Do you play
Pokemon trading card
Hearthstone?
game online. Sorry, Hearthstone. I haven't played in
Do you?
years.
Okay,
I played in
just
beta.
curious. I don't
I
play it.
played. I played in beta. I played at the beginning. It was really fun at the beginning. It was very easy. When they started doing like the dungeon adventure things, where you pay $10 for like four cards, and like the adventures are really fun, and the unique boss fights are super sick. I think it's really cool. But gating specific cards that are meta defining behind that content to me was a huge mistake. And that's about when I stopped playing. I did come back when they came out with the Demon Hunter class, the Illidan class.
Mhm.
Right when that was released, and I hit legendary with it because it was busted. They promptly nerfed it in the next season, and then I haven't played since then. I haven't played since I hit legendary or whatever it is, mythic. I don't know what it is in that game. Is it legendary? I think it's
Well,
legendary.
I don't know. I don't
Whatever.
really play
It's not.
Hearthstone. I just was like, oh, digital card games. I know Hearthstone is popular, kind of.
Yeah. But yeah, so there's always something in circulation, and I think MapleStory and RuneScape will probably be the only two that will forever be in rotation for the rest of my life. Like I will probably play
Because
them
they're so
in some
passive.
capacity. Yeah. I'll play them in some
Yeah,
capacity until the day the servers will allow me to no longer log in.
that, oh
Like
my gosh. I have already discussed with numerous people. I do not know what will happen the day that Maple servers go down. That game has been there since junior high for me. And so I'm like, what do I do? It'll just be really, really weird when those servers go down. Ripping pepperonis. Uh, yeah, so with that idea, I have a different sort of approach. Instead of playing multiple games at once, I have a similar rotation style thing, but it happens pretty much on like an annual, yearly sort of basis. So right now, League's been in for a long time because I've been playing with a group of friends, and of course with Rolando and with a whole bunch of people. But that's why League has been kind of on the back burner, or not on the back burner. It's always been kind of there. Playing mostly every night, except for nights I want to get something done or get something written. But then for daytime gaming with any time that I do have, being an adult and a parent is hard, as I'm sure as we can both attest to.
100%.
Finding
100%.
time to do stuff that you're like, oh, I'm interested in this, but people need me,
Well, I
and
mean,
so
even
uh,
today, we were supposed to start recording this like 4 hours ago, and here we are.
yeah. That was a lot of factors. Yeah, weird things are always going to happen as an adult, and you just have to roll with it. But I think for single player, Skyrim is an evergreen game for me. There's never a bad time to be like, oh, I don't really want to go back to Skyrim, because there's always something fun. And Skyrim is almost kind of a hit shit game to me sometimes. Then honestly, like another game that I've realized that I come back to pretty frequently is, well, the Souls series, Dark Souls, whatnot. Those are another uh, bunch of evergreen games where I honestly feel like I'll just spin a dartboard and then just throw a dart at it, and then whatever it lands on, that's the Dark Souls game I'm playing. I'm like, oh, looks like I'm playing Dark Souls 2. I guess I ate myself today, because Dark Souls 2 can be kind of miserable sometimes. I love it. I promise I do. But yeah, Dark Souls 2 is it's got some funky design decisions that are sometimes make me question, but other parts of it are really fantastic, and has a lot of most like amazing bosses in the game, in the series. I think they have a lot of them, at least. But then I've also noticed that Need for Speed Most Wanted, yes, that one from 2005. It about once a year, or maybe like once every 2 years, I get this insatiable itch to play the best racing game ever made. I hop on to Need for Speed Most Wanted. I make a new save. I blast through the Elite Four, not the Elite Four. Wow, we've been talking way too much about Pokemon. Through the blacklist, and then that's it. That's my fix. It usually you can get it done in like maybe 12 to 20 hours of playtime. Like I like to do every single race because I'm weird like that. But I just go through, I 100% the game, and I go awesome, and then I'm good. I'm good for another year or two. I don't know why it happens. It's ancient history. There are far better racing games that have been released since. It's so charming. I think it's that those old games and their charm. And it's decently difficult. There are times where you're a little bit like, okay, why am I, an entire lap ahead of the AI? That's interesting. And other times where you're like, okay, I'm almost an entire lap ahead of everyone. I got this race in the bag. And then you watch the rubber banding kick in as one of the cars just starts zipping around corners. You're like, I don't think that's how cars work, but okay. So yeah, it's a finicky game, but it's old, it's charming. But
that's
bringing
so one of the,
mhm.
go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, okay. There was something I was going to say is bringing things back to difficulty and complexity was something you had mentioned. So you said on Legendary on Skyrim, I do have to correct. In Skyrim's Legendary Edition, Legendary difficulty, you can fast travel. Well, what you're
Oh,
thinking of
you
is
can.
probably
Okay,
survival mode. You are thinking of survival mode. And I actually really like
probably.
the survival modes, the survival mode in at least the way that it's implemented in Skyrim. Of course, I like the modded versions like Sunhelm or Frostfall better, but um, yeah. And so in the survival mode, it's really interesting how one simple added mechanic of like food, cold, sleep, all of those things can completely change how you play the game, because I found that with when I did my survival mode playthroughs of Skyrim once Anniversary Edition came out, you kind of do this thing where you make yourself a sort of base of operations, and then you start to do everything that's within a day's one day's, like, food and sleep consumption essentially. And so you start to operate within a day's journey of your like your surrounding area, because there's no fast travel, so you have to be able to make a round trip. And it was this really interesting layer that, while it didn't necessarily add, difficulty, like, oh, you have to be more mechanically on point to get through this, it created this entire new dynamic with how you related to the world, where it would be like, okay, this quest is really far away, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop. And you would start to make these little journeys in your brain of like, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here. So let's say you start in Whiterun, you get a quest that's out in Markarth. I'm going to go here, I'm going to go to Riverwood. Then from Riverwood, I'm gonna maybe go up to Dragon's Bridge, not Riverwood. Wow, I'm gonna go to Rorikstead. Then from Rorikstead, I'm going to cut through the mountains. I'm gonna try and get a stop at Old Hroldan, which is an inn that's out in kind of the middle of BFE. That is butt fucking Egypt. For those who do not know what BFE is, and then from Old Hroldan, I'm going to make the last day's journey to Markarth, and you would come up with these long trips, and it was this really fun level of immersion that you didn't get in the main game, because in the main game it would be like, oh, go to Markarth and get this, and you go, okay, fast travel to Markarth, and then get it, grab the thing, talk to the person, fight a dude, whatever, come back to Whiterun, bada bing, quest completed. But when you're doing when you do this survival mode, these survival mode playthroughs with no fast travel, it really forces you to immerse further into the game. That's kind of what we were talking about, harder difficulties, where it doesn't just have to be harder enemies, harder AI. It can be harder restrictions placed on you either by yourself or by the game's rule set. Um, and it makes this really interesting, these new dynamics where if you are immersing yourself better and more correctly, I guess, into the world, you will get more out of it and you will be able to succeed on these harder difficulties. And that was I think the thing that just sent me for this wonderful loop when playing on a legendary difficulty survival playthrough. You just had to be like, okay, you have to make plans, you have to avoid conflicts sometimes, but smartly avoid conflicts, because you're like, it's like 7 o'clock, come on, I gotta get to the end, come on, running low on food, let's go. So yeah, that's just something I've noticed about that. Did you have something you wanted to add to that? Because there was something I wanted to transition that into about tedium.
Um, but so I literally just had a thought. But survival mode. Speaking of survival mode, survival mode is very this was very very interesting. I like it a lot in very specific games in the way that it's done. Like for example, Fallout 4, I think, is one that I have enjoyed the most simply because like farms and settlements play a role, so you can like move around. You don't have to be centered around like a location in the game. You can create, well, I guess they are locations in the game, but you can make them more hospitable.
Mhm.
Um, you can
Mhm.
make them more yours as you're moving throughout the map, and then you can do that same thing because at the beginning, of course, you do. I forget what the starting settlement is called in Fallout 4,
I'm trying to
but
remember.
but like you start and you build that up and you have make that so they can defend themselves, and then that's usually around the point in time in the game where you start getting like, hey, there's people across the wasteland over here that have bandits bugging them, and you're like, all right, okay, cool, stock up on all my stuff, go over there, talk to them, go beat up the bandits, go back to their place, and they're like, okay, cool, now they like me, and you're there, and then you're like, all right, cool, I brought all my stuff, I'm going to use my stuff to build up your defenses so you can defend yourselves. And then you do that. And so now you have this connection on the other side of the wasteland. You're like, well, I'm going to have quests over here later. So this is going to be useful to have as a defense point if something happens, a place to run to, somewhere to rest if something goes longer than I wanted it to, so on and so forth. So I think that's done really, really well. And maybe I'd enjoy Skyrim's version a little bit better if that was something that was normally implemented. Granted, you can mod that in. That's 100% a thing you can do.
Yeah,
I know
I
that
was
for a
gonna
fact
say.
because I have the mod. Like I 100 I have the mod. It's fun. There's even the
Mhm.
one where you can like just make camp like a normal D&D party where you just set up
Yeah,
a fucking
yeah,
tent in the
campsite
fire.
or campfire.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So like it's a thing you can do, and it's definitely a lot more enjoyable that way. Just like or
Hmm.
I mean like organically, I guess. If it was just
Hmm.
in the game already, it would have been a lot better. But obviously, one game is an improvement over the other in some aspects.
Hmm. With that whole idea, I was actually going to go to a point that I, kind of goes around in my mind about tedium in games, and it's something that comes up in Skyrim modding a lot, and it does kind of tie back into that complexity, difficulty idea of when does something overstep from complexity into becoming tedium. There's engaging immersive complexity, and then there is being tedious. Like a lot of people criticize Red Dead Redemption 2, which everyone's like, oh, it's a fantastic game, but I really hated that I had to sit through like minutes long animations for every little thing. Want to kill an animal, want to skin it, it's a couple minutes animation. Want to do this, it's an animation. Want to do this, it's an animation. And they're like, can I please just, okay, I get it, I skinned my horse. Yeah. And so it's like a good D&D example is the DM that feels like they have to explain everything you did. So we traveled to this city, and if they don't have any encounters planned, they say, okay, so you start traveling. Okay, is there any encounters? No, you just keep traveling. What do you do while you travel? We talk. Okay, what do you talk about? Of is anything going to happen or not?
Yeah, 100%.
Because if nothing's going to happen, then just say you arrive in 2 days, you are down this much food, you are down this much gold. If nothing was going to happen, then just don't bother with it. And there's a that the old saying, show don't tell, and or yeah, I guess, yeah, show don't tell. And where some games it feels like they have to tell you everything, it's like, stop. Please, just, you can show me, I get the idea, my mind can make the distinction between, like, I clicked on the horse and then I got a horse skin or whatever, and that's cool, that's whatever, that makes sense. I don't need to go through you know a 5 minute animation, or however, I don't know the exact length of them, but yeah. So, like, what do you think on that idea of, like, where games cross over into tedium, because that comes up in Skyrim modding a lot, like I said a bit ago, where people are like, I don't understand why people want to have to micromanage food and warmth and thirst and your piss meter and your shit meter and, like, your, I don't know, like, a million and one bars to micromanage. And I think that's just something that's really interesting, is when does the game stop being fun as it gets more complex and it just drops off into the uncanny valley of why the hell am I wasting my time trying to get set up for the journey, spending longer setting up for the journey than going on it.
I think it starts hitting that point when so like for me at least, I can't really like speak in general, right? But like for me it gets to that point um when stuff is so difficult that you start avoiding things. But I guess there's strategic
Mm,
avoidance and there's just outright avoidance, right? Like there's just bypassing certain encounters you know you're gonna have. Or like for example, there's in Fallout 4, if you're doing a survival difficulty and you are not going to join the Brotherhood of Steel, you have to join. You can't take a side with the Institute or what's it called, um, or the Minutemen. Because if you
Railroad.
do, then you're against the Brotherhood of Steel and you just die. Um, just because of the sheer firepower and the weapons and the mechs and all that. So like you literally cannot take a side until the game forces you to right before the giant mech comes out of the ground. Um, like it's literally impossible. Um, so like when that kind of stuff, that's when it becomes tedious. But that's more like a gameplay gameplay thing. But like what I don't know that I am the appropriate person to kind of speak on it because like I like games like RuneScape where
Oh,
that
that is true.
it's tedious.
Yeah.
It's tedium the game. You
Hmm.
like, oh hey, I want this thing and I need to hit trees for 60 hours to get it. Okay, I can do that.
Hmm.
Like I have two maxed RuneScape accounts and one Iron Man that's about halfway. And that's something I always passively play, whether it's on my phone or on the computer or whatever. That one's just brainless. It's really fun. Anyways, sorry. But
I
like,
think. Oh,
T- go ahead.
okay. You continue.
So
Yeah, continue.
tedious is to me is like no ends to a mean. I get a lot more dopamine release than most people do when uh, small tasks are completed as opposed to big tasks. I think that's just the way my brain is wired, and because of that, I'm able to do certain things. Like instead of it being right, so like let's say you're playing. I keep using Fallout 4 as an example because that's the most experience I have with something with those kinds of systems, right? Um, where it's like, okay, so I need food, I need water, I need weapons, enchantments, whatever my strategy is for that bandit hideout in the factory. You know what I'm talking about? Like right at the beginning, you get sent to the factory where the bandits are at.
Hmm.
Um,
With
and it's like the first mission that the Minuteman leader sends you on.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes, yes.
Um,
Okay. Now I know which one you're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. And like you're setting, let's say you're setting up for that, and you're like, okay, well, it's about this long away. I'm gonna need this much food, this much water. I can rest here, here, and there throughout. And then when you play the game as much as you do, as much as I do, you actually learn where the sleeping bags throughout abandoned buildings are. So like you kind of set up that way. So to me, whereas somebody else preparing for that kind of thing would be, oh, okay, I have to do all this stuff so then I can go do this thing. But for me, it's like, okay, well, I need to establish a food source. I established a food source, dopamine release. All right, cool. Now I need to map out a route to go to this city. All right, cool. I map out the route, dopamine release. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um,
No, that makes
because
sense.
I get a lot more enjoyment on the small accomplishments that then make the bigger accomplishments that much more worth it.
Bro, you're gonna love if you start and reboot on MapleStory. You're gonna freaking love it. It's small
I'm
accomplishments of a
afraid.
game.
I'm I'm afraid. I'm like, oh, I plus 2 damage on my sword. Ah!
You're gonna like I that the cubing system like with reboot. You're gonna when you see your gear tier up from like unique to legendary, you're probably gonna have like a little issue in your pants. Like honestly, it's is pretty. They're pretty good at what they do. You see the little thing shine, and then it goes from unique to legendary, and you're just like, yeah, I made that. um so yeah, I guess because I'm a little different, I am okay. I have a pretty solidly, high tolerance um for tedium, and for minuscule tasks. And yeah, that comes from 14 years of playing MapleStory and having to spend 7 hours to grind one single level back in the day. But the I think that the whole like idea of like tedium comes in where people feel like a they are playing the mechanic, the survival mod, whatever it is that is adding it, instead of the actual game, instead of feeling like in appending to a game they already like and being like, here's a way to get more immersed in this game. It says, here is something new to play. You are now going to be playing Survival Simulator, where you're going to be constantly worried about adventuring in the adventure game, because if you adventure too far, you're going to starve or freeze or die and from some other thing, and not die from dragons or bandits or whatnot. Or you're going to be halfway through a dragon fight, and then all of a sudden your health is going to get halved because you forgot to eat, and like stuff like that. And so I think that that is kind of where a lot of people draw their line. And I'm personally okay with games that have punishment for not interacting with their with their mechanics properly, especially when it comes to tedium and survival, adding a layer of difficulty. Because I remember in that survival mode playthrough I was doing, it added a lot more stress to things like the sanguine vampirus, which is the vampire disease in Skyrim.
Mhm.
So when
Mhm.
you get sanguine vampirus, that means you're like, I think you have 3 days to get cured, or you turn into a vampire. So in vanilla Skyrim, what you do is you go, oh no, sanguine vampirus, and then you double check, see if you have a cure disease potion. If not, you fast travel to a town, pop any one of the shrines, bada bop, you're good. With this, you've been out for 2 days on a journey, you have contracted sanguine vampirus, you realize that you are dead center in the middle of nowhere. There is no shrine. Like, let's say you're just outside of Rorikstead, because I know there's like a vampire den near Rorikstead. Um, and you are now too far away from any shrines. There are no general stores that can sell cure disease potions. Your options are to run to one of the cities in the next 3 days while not starving, or get be blessed by RNGesus, and you run into a vigilant of Stendar who will cure you for free. Those are your two options. um and so it suddenly takes what's a really non factor in the vanilla game, and it completely overhauls it into being the most stressful life or death. Like, I am traveling at night, when I can barely see, because if I don't make it to town by tomorrow, I am going to be a vampire, and it's going to cost a lot more to cure that than to cure this. And so, yeah, it's really interesting how that dynamic, and how sometimes just difficulty or just added or removed mechanics can influence other portions of a game to such a degree that you have to recontextualize and consider them to be a much bigger threat than they used to be. A lot of people talk about that on harder difficulties. It's not the harder enemies, because you knew the hard enemies were hard, but it's easy to forget that the easy enemies are now also hard. And so you ignore the easy
Right.
enemies, and then they two-shot you, and you're like, oh shoot, I was so busy focusing on this guy that I completely forgot that the other guys actually do damage now. So that's a just kind of a something I've noticed with games and difficulty and whatnot. But yeah, Was there something you wanted to add, Rolando?
Um, Not really, honestly. Um, that's one of those things where like I can see how, from an objective point of view, how that would be like annoying. Like you're, it's yeah. But like I don't know. I don't mind as much. Um, I don't mind as much that kind of thing because it throws a curveball, and if it happens often enough, I guess it could be. It could be like too much. You know what I mean? Like it could be like, okay, well here it happened again. Now I have to do the same thing. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't know. It's one of those things where like I think it's like the perspective of what people of what you're expecting from it, and a lot of the times, the people who are playing these difficulties, like me or you or whatever, tend to play things at that difficulty, um, in like just to start. So like it's something that we're kind of okay with, right? Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know, and I think
Cool.
that's like something we're willing to like give up. But no, I don't know. Like I do like that a lot. I like that in a certain scope of certain mechanics being relevant at higher difficulties rather than others. Like the
Hmm.
like the vampire disease example is a very good example.
Or
Like
resistance
there's
potions. You know how most games you get just
yeah,
flooded with resist fire, resist frost. And you're like, what do I do with this?
yep,
I've ran into two frost enemies and I one shot them. Yeah, well, when they're one shotting you, all of a sudden
yeah,
50% reduced frost damage looks real good.
yeah. 100%. One of the mods for Skyrim that I've actually had a lot of fun with, I can't remember what it's called, but essentially it makes random encounters less random. It makes them make sense and they happen more often. Um, so,
Hmm.
like, let's say you're walking around the, like an Imperial city or whatever, an Imperial run city, and they're like, oh, they're like taking prisoners off to go get beheaded or whatever, and you can like interact with this. Though there's a couple ways you can interact with it. You can talk to the guard, you can intimidate them, you can pay them off, or you can just like kill the guards around them, let all the prisoners go, or you can like sneak up behind
Hmm.
everybody and then like cut their bindings, and then they like
Hmm.
run off, and you could just like watch the chaos. Um, but like
I
the
think
other thing that those
that's.
random encounters do is like the mages and stuff that you run into, and like the people who hunt you and stuff, they will actively be using magics and weapon types and damages that you are not like good against. So like for example, like if
Hmm.
you're wearing like plate armor, um, it would make sense. You're in metal, blah blah blah. We're gonna use like fire damage or whatever, right? Because
Hmm.
canonically, in like the real world, if I'm in heavy plate and someone is flamethrowering my face, I'm gonna be literally cooked alive. It doesn't necessarily change the damage profile, but it makes more sense and it's more immersive. Immersive. Anyways, sorry. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, no, that I think you're thinking of two separate mods playing together. I know
could
there's
be,
a lot of
could be.
world and encounter mods, but the one you're talking about is Know Your Enemy. And it's a mod
Yes,
that makes it
yes.
so that resistances are like relevant. So like certain armor, so like ebony was known as like the anti-magic armor, so it has ridiculous magic like ridiculous magic damage reduction, but I think it was really weak to blunt, if I'm remembering correctly. It shatters
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah,
easily because like ebony can get really brittle, so you have a weakness to blunt weapons, but you resist magic like a beast. And so like yeah, like a lot of steel and metal armors, you're really weak to shock because conductive metal, so you're just like, oh cool. And same thing with fire, yeah, the armor's literally melting to your skin. Isn't that fun? um and always makes you think of the old medieval like cauldron thing where they would dump hot oil on soldiers and their armor would literally graft to their skin. And oh man, people have always kind of been jerks to each other. And so oh yeah, so that's the mod I think you're thinking of. So it was probably what you experienced there. This is a whole other entire episode worth of discussion. Is something that
mm-hmm.
the modding community calls the cathedral concept, where mods are not a bunch of people building separate houses in a neighborhood, and you go, this is a cool neighborhood, there's a lot of interesting houses with different designs. But modding is rather thinking of Skyrim as a cathedral, and everybody is contributing their best talents to make this beautiful thing that, it's not one person that builds a cathedral. You have your architects and the painters and the instrument builders that put the organ in, and they all have to work around each other. And that's where you get these mod interactions that weren't intended necessarily. The authors didn't, collaborate and say, oh, we're gonna do this, and you're gonna put this in your mod, I'm gonna put this in my mod, so if somebody randomly downloads both of these, they're gonna play together really well. But rather, you got hit by a random encounter from a thing that adds more interesting random encounters, and then know your enemy kicked in because there were enemies involved in that encounter. You got hit by an encounter that you weren't prepared for, and you actually had to think on your feet for once, which Skyrim doesn't really make you do in the vanilla game. And it was like one of those, holy crap. It felt like one mod even though it wasn't.
Right.
I have
No,
a
100%.
similar
100%.
I have a similar instance that happened to me a few years ago on one of my favorite playthroughs. I was playing as a paladin, and this was an interaction between graphics mods just made the whole thing look cool, but it was a funny interaction that was still, cool and interesting, and added a layer of gameplay that wasn't intended. And it was an interaction between the Ordinator perk overhaul and organized bandits of Skyrim. And so I was doing a, D&D style playthrough. Everybody's done that at least once with their modded Skyrim. We have 4 followers, or you and 3 followers, however you structure your party. And so you have your tank, your healer, your range DPS, and a melee DPS, or something along those lines. And so I was playing as the tank. And so I, would lead every charge, with like lead the Tempest, which is an Ordinator perk that if you run into battle, it gives all allies within vicinity a buff. So, everybody fights better when the tank is, doing their job and moving towards the enemies instead of running away. Isn't that crazy concept? And so, we were swinging, taking down bandits left and right, and trying to keep the order of priority, because organized bandits in Skyrim, what that mod does is it adds different bandit classes and types into the game, and it makes it so that you actually kind of have to plan your encounters with bandits. You can't just run in there and just be like, all right, I'm just going to start swinging, and anything in here that is taller than the grass is going to get cut down. You actually have to think, okay, they have a dropper. Bandit droppers are archers that can pretty much one shot you from just about like 100%, with one arrow, because they're assassins. There's bandit hiddens they start out invisible, and I think they do get a sneak attack multiplier, or they just have ridiculously buffed dagger damage. But if you get into a fight and you don't notice one coming around behind you, I have had so many times where I just get randomly backstabbed out of nowhere because, oops, forgot about the hidden. Itchy. And so, you have to really think about these things. And one of the bandit classes is a bandit Thornhide, which they have melee damage reflection. If you are hitting them from melee range, they will reflect a portion of the damage you deal to them at you. So you can't just start swinging willy nilly. And if you're taking some of your own damage and theirs, you're probably gonna die. And so so I went into this fight. I was trying to hit one of the priority bandits. They're called blue skulls. They do massive melee damage, but they are so squishy. And so essentially you have to hit them with you just get them with one or two good attacks, and they'll go down. And so I was going to use the perk for one-handed maces from Ordinator called Toll the Bell, where if you hit an enemy with a sideways power attack, it drains all of your stamina. So you have to, think and do I want to spend all my stamina on this? But you are rewarded with a critical strike that deals 1% additional damage for every point of stamina spent. So if you have I think I had 270, 280. stamina, so it drains 280 stamina, but I deal a critical 280% extra damage. So one shot essentially. And I missed the blue skull and I hit the bandit Thornhide. And if what I explained is starting to go on in your head, I one shot myself as a 400 health tank. And I one
That's
shot the
fucking
bandit
funny.
Thornhide as well, but because the reflection, we both just kind of bounced off each other and fell down dead. And I was like, that was the best mod interaction I have ever seen in my life, and I really, really loved it. That was one of those. I think that was the moment that I fell in love with those two mods. Like went from yeah, they're pretty good to okay, that is the kind of mechanical interaction that I desperately wanted in vanilla Skyrim, having to think about things. And so yeah, that was easily my favorite, cathedral concept of modding, where two mod authors, mods made at different times by different people, these they ran into each other and something beautiful happened. So yeah,
I, I,
that's my experience.
yeah, I think the analogy would work a little bit better if it was like an orchestra, right? Because if you take any one person inside of an orchestra, except for maybe the conductor himself, and any one in person or instrument or group of people can create a song that's beautiful and amazing in and of itself. But then you put them all
Mhm.
together and it makes this amalgamation of noises that is pleasing to the ear in kind of a weird way. Whether it, like one way or another. So it's a less so like you have Ordinator coming in on the violin and you have graphics mods coming in on the tuba because that's your baseline. Because if your game doesn't look good, it's shit. Um, and
Look at this guy
then you
playing
have,
unmodded Skyrim. What a nerd.
yeah, and if your water doesn't flow, I don't know what you're doing with your life.
Man, if you
But
haven't done the right flow edits to your water, what are you doing, man?
yeah, and then you got like encounter mods coming in from the side, from coming in on the saxophone. And then you have like the war actually mattering in
Hmm.
Skyrim. You know that big thing that ends the campaign? Yeah, that war
Hmm.
actually mattering and having an effect on the world around you, coming in on the trumpet. You know what I mean? Like all of that together with the random encounters and like the random war skirmishes that happen with uh, the resistances changes to armors and stuff. Like it's so good. It's so fantastic. And then like don't even get me started on Live Another Life or whatever.
Oh
Like
yeah,
that.
you
Yeah,
mean yeah, actually role
mods
playing
can be an
instead of you
entirely
are a
different
prisoner.
conversation.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
we're gonna
right.
get to mods absolutely someday and how they can overhaul that sort of thing. But I do like that analogy of an orchestra, because it's like yeah, they're really pretty on their own, but they're even better, and they're better, and then the sum of their parts, when you put them all together and you go wow, this is all happening at once. And immersion doesn't have to happen in a oh, I need to do more stuff in a game. Sometimes it's as simple
Right.
as making you think a little harder about how you're going to approach the game's world. It's really as simple as that. Organized bandits, all of a sudden I don't just want to run into in the middle of an open field when they have two bandit droppers. They're gonna one shot me. So I instead am going to try and run behind rocks and then run behind another rock. I'm going to try and bait in their melees to walk into me behind the rocks so that their archers can't support them. Then I'm going to get up close so the archers can no longer get to me. And so all of a sudden you're not doing anything necessarily different, and it's not necessarily making the game just oh, enemies have more health and damage. These enemies don't have much more health or any more health. Droppers are really squishy. If you get in on them, you're gonna win. But if you are staying at a range and trying to just stay out in the open and let them pepper you with arrows, they're gonna hit you and it's gonna hurt. So it just changing that way that you think about how you're going to approach the game and its encounters is enough to immerse you into the world. And like that mod you were talking about, know your enemy, where all of a sudden you see an enemy armored a certain way and you go, I got just the thing for that, or I don't have the thing for that,
Mhm.
shoot. What am I gonna do? So yeah, I really like that idea.
I mean, yeah. Yup, yup, yup.
Okay, I didn't know if you were gonna add anything else there.
Oh no, I got.
But
See, the problem is I do, but if I do, then we're not gonna stop. Uh,
exactly, that is, yeah. You know what? I think we've already decided next week's or next meetings discussion is how mods have how mods can impact the game that they are present in, and what our experiences with mods have been, and why mods are generally a good thing, and any company that stops the community from putting out mods is a horrible, greedy corporate bastard.
100%.
All
Especially
right.
when you no longer provide content updates for your own game. But yeah.
So thank you very much, Rolando. That was a really solid conversation. I like that it just kind of went off. We were like game difficulty and everything else, and so yeah, I think that if that is everything you would like to say, then I would just like to thank everyone for listening. If you are interested in hearing more from us, you can follow us on Twitter and YouTube at Punkling Podcast. If you are listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe and let us know what other topics you want to hear about from us. Thank you all so much for listening, and we can't wait to see you come back next time.